My name is Michael, and I'm the Inside Communications Director for Human San Quentin. The contents of this episode include strong language and graphic descriptions of violent crimes that may include sexual assault. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to the Prison Podcast. I'm your host, Diane Kahn, Executive Director of Humans of San Quentin, and we're grateful to have you with us today. The Prison Podcast brings forward the voices of survivors of violent crimes and their convicted offenders, unearthing stories excluded from public conversation. The podcast centers around the transformative process of the victim-offender dialogue, a facilitated meeting within a prison setting that brings together someone who has experienced harm and the person responsible for causing it. Each episode features a candid conversation with someone who has completed the extensive victim-offender dialogue program, offering profound insights into the power of vulnerability and self-reflection. By drawing back the curtain on the complex relationships forged by harm, the Prison Podcast provides a platform for healing, empathy, and understanding. Unlike traditional true crime media, the podcast emphasizes personal agency and the journey of reconciliation, transforming societal attitudes and fostering emotional connection. Through these powerful conversations, we hope to inspire individual change, promote healing within our communities, and support a more compassionate understanding of justice.
So that's the hardest part for me today, because it's easy to do wrong, but it's hard to do right.
Today, I'm talking with Matthew from his prison cell in California. Last episode, Melissa recounted the tragic loss of her father, who was killed in 1993 at a family party on the eve of his sister's wedding. The man who is in prison since he was 22 years old at the time of the murder is Matthew. He was convicted and has served 30 years of his sentence. You might be able to recognize the sound of talking through a payphone on a wall, so the quality is not what you expect, and you will often hear the abrupt interruptions of an automated voice telling us that we're being recorded by the prison. That sounds like this.
This is Global Telling. You have a prepaid call from
Matthew Padilla.
an inmate at the California Correctional Institution, Tehachapi, California.
Welcome to the reality of communicating with people who are incarcerated. Here's Matthew.
So I was basically the youngest of 10 boys, and we all ran around together. All my cousins, they wrestled. All of my older brothers, except for one of them, all boxed. So when I was a kid, they made me fight my brother. They made me fight other kids. I felt like an animal, basically, being treated like a kid treated like an animal, made to fight. And they thought it was funny, and it was joking. It was in the 70s. So I grew up into violence. As I got older, I tried to remove myself from it. Both my parents were alcoholics. They were abusive to each other and their kids. I was abused physically, emotionally, mentally, everything. Every kind of abuse you could think of, even sexually abused as a kid. I always protected my mom from the abuse from my father. I fought my father at the age of 12. I always stayed in the house where it was toxic. Both parents were alcoholics and abusive, but I had a brother who was paralyzed in that house. So I stayed there to make sure nothing happened to him or nothing happened to my mom. Whereas my brother, when my mom and dad would start yelling and screaming and fighting, he would leave. He would get away. But I stayed. I seen the way my life was going, the violence, and I tried to remove myself from it.
Matthew landed a job working construction on an underground pipeline in an effort to keep himself out of trouble. But he admits he ended up spending his paychecks on alcohol and drugs.
And I was grossing approximately $60,000 a year at that age, and that was too much for a kid of my age. And I was spending it all on alcohol, drugs, women, and just partying with friends. So that was my lifestyle. And I had 4 DUIs that I had gotten in a year through drinking. And then I did a year in the county jail. When I got out of jail, my boss wouldn't hire me back. So it took a while for me to get my job back. And when I did finally get my job back, I was living with my brother and my best friend, Robert, who is my victim's brother-in-law.
In case you didn't make out that audio, Matthew served his time and struggled to get his job back once he was out of the county jail. He lived with his brother and a guy named Robert. Robert is Melissa's uncle. That's how Matthew met Melissa's father.
So the night of the incident, this was in 93, and we were having a party for my roommate, Robert Manier, at his brother's house, Mike's. So we all go to the party, and we have a keg of beer and a bunch of mixed drinks that we're making. And so everyone's drinking a lot. I leave and I go get some methamphetamines with a friend. But when I come back, there's someone who's starting a fight in the backyard. And it was the victim, Robert Barnett, it was his brother who started the stuff with one of my friends. But then when I went to the backyard, he goes, Matthew, you see the guy over there? He's been messing with me all night. And he has a knife. Well, I look across the yard and I see the guy and his sister. It's Danny Barnett, and I can't remember the girl's name. But they're in the backyard. And he tells me, well, he has a knife. And I see them looking over at me, and they say, well, that's not Matt, that's Matt. They're pointing at my friend and pointing at me, saying I'm Matt. So I realized that they're only messing with my friend because they believe he is me. So I told him, if he pulls out a knife, I go, put that away, you're acting stupid, I'll take care of it. So the next thing you know, a big fight breaks out where I beat the guy up. I walk away, I go into the kitchen and tell my brother, hey, let's leave because guys outside acting stupid. And well, my brother, he comes to the back door with me, my roommate Robert Manier, and these are his in-laws. And he says, hey, let's fight one-on-one. Your little brother and my little brother. That's what my brother tells the victim. Let's fight one-on-one, and your little brother and my little brother fight one-on-one, and we'll end it. Well, one pulls out a bat, one pulls out a knife, and then just a big old fight broke out, and I ended up stabbing Robert Barnett, who was Melissa's dad. And that night I went to jail, and I got pled guilty to murder because it's what I did. And I've been in prison for 30 years now. I was 22 years old. I had just got my job back full time that night, that day, and my whole life just changed that night.
And how were you feeling when you were arrested that night?
Well, I was very intoxicated. I could not remember all the events of that night. It took me probably a year to just remember everything that happened that night. But when I woke up in the county jail, it was just like my life was over.
Matthew bounced around to different prisons, acting out violently as his familial support system in the free world started to crumble.
I got to a point where my life was just leading in the wrong direction. I have assault on staff, 2 assault with deadly weapons in prison. And I was in Pelican Bay in 97. My dad died in 95. So I was like acting out violently. And one of my brother's friends, he worked up there in Pelican Bay. He was a CO. And he keeps telling me, hey, Matthew, you need to talk to me. And he's pointing at his notepad. And I go, no, I'm not talking to you. So he keeps doing this every time he sees me. So I write to my brother in New York because this was his friend in high school. I tell him, hey, get a hold of Todd and find out why Chris keeps telling me I need to talk to him. So he writes me back and tells me, Matthew, you need to sit down with Chris. He's not playing with you. It's serious. So I wrote Chris, and he takes me to his office, and he opens up a folder and goes, look, read these kites. They want me dead. And I said, wow. He goes, look, I can't sit back and watch you die in prison. You know, I mean, your brother was my friend. It's just, you know. He goes, I want you to go back and write a history of everything you've been involved in, and I'm going to get you out of this active prison and into another prison. And that's when I went to Mill Creek in 2001. I stayed there from 2001 to 2005, but I was still being violent, fighting. I was still drinking. I was still doing drugs up until 2010. My mother got sick, and she told me she was sick, that she was dying, and she wanted me to change my ways. And she basically came to visit me and told me, what do I have to do to get you to stay out of trouble? And I told her it's hard for me to quit fighting. It's hard. And she goes, well, you can't do this for your mother? And I looked at her and I was like, wow. I told her, look, Mom, just send me $100 a month. I'll quit all the stuff I've been doing.
Since 2010, Matthew has stayed out of trouble for the most part. But after his mother died, Matthew struggled to hold himself together mentally.
When she died, I felt that I lost everybody in my life. Everybody I cared for, because I didn't have no one to talk to anymore. Nobody I was close to, no one I could confide in, no one who would come and see me. And, a lot of us get desensitized to affection, because we don't get that here.
Mm-hmm.
There won't even be a free staff shake your hand or nothing. There's no touch. It's just.
You can hear the pain and loneliness in Matthew's voice over the phone. He had just lost the last pillar of his support structure and had no one to turn to. Now, Matthew was searching for purpose.
But I had to keep my mind on, it was on Melissa, my victim's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Because her reaching out to me gave me a reason to live.
Why, by her reaching out to you, did that give you a reason to live?
It's what I've done to her, what I took from her father, and for me to be the person that did that and know her when she was a child, because I did know her when she was a child, when she was a baby, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I did know her. I've seen her. I remembered her. But I remember as that little girl. So every time I thought about her, I thought about that baby, that little girl. How could I do that to her? You know what I mean? How can I just go and do something so drastic? But how would she feel? Every board, I went to every board I had lost everything at the time. But when we met in November of 2022, my whole life changed.
Matthew and Melissa met in November of 2022. There was a bit of a logistical mix-up in who was going where, who was going into the room first, etc. As Matthew was waiting to enter the room, he could hear Melissa asking if the guards would let Matthew go in first. Little did she know that Matthew had just asked the guards to let Melissa go in first, as an effort to make her feel more comfortable.
Well, I didn't want her to be uncomfortable. So I told them, hey, can you sit me in this other room? Because when she comes in, I want her to be comfortable. And they coming in, not seeing me in cuffs and stuff. So they said, well, we can't put you in this conference room. And I go, well, then put me in that closet over there. So I told them the 2 SEALs took me in the closet, a mop closet. So I'm sitting in the mop closet. But when she comes in, she's telling the SEALs, no, I want Matthew to go on first because I don't want him to be uncomfortable. So we're both trying to make each other comfortable. So it was kind of cool to hear that.
And this was this actually the first time you talked to her, or had you talked to her previously?
This is the first time I ever met her.
Had you ever talked to her on the phone or anything?
I haven't talked to her on the phone or nothing. Noelle and Elaine from the Victim Offender Dialogue came to meet with me. They were my our mediators. Mm-hmm. So they met with me 5 times, and they told me how the process was going to go. So yeah, they helped us through everything, the whole thing. And we met that day. It was her, and then I was sitting in the room first, but when she first came in, I just got up and immediately hugged each other and we cried together. And just to let that out, it was a big relief for me personally, and her also. Matthew struggled with the pain he felt when listening to what the fallout of his actions did to Melissa and her family. But to hear all that she had went through, how her mother turned to alcohol and drugs after what I did, and how she was treated as a child, and the abuse that she went through, the anger issues she had growing up, just to hear the impact that my actions had on her life, it moved me. Mm-hmm. It was very emotional because I didn't know that. I didn't know that part. The abuse that my actions had upon her. It was very moving. It gave me a new perspective on my life and the way I was living my life. And from that day forward, I have to live a life of amends, not only to myself, I forgive them. So the hardest thing I told her was there. She goes, Matthew, I forgive you, but I want you to forgive yourself. And I told her I can't forgive myself. It's just so hard because every time I went to board, I would deny myself 3 years, 5 years, 3 years. I wouldn't even go to board.
And explain that to people that don't understand how you can deny yourself.
So when you go to board, you can go have your hearing heard, And the commissioner can deny you 3 to 15 years. But you can go in there and say, I will stipulate for 3 years. I will stipulate for 5 years. You're choosing not to go to board, but delay your board yourself. Say, I'm not ready. I don't want to have my hearing today. I'll deny myself for 3 years. Oh, I don't feel good today. I'll deny myself for 5 years. I did that for 11 years. 2 3-year denials and a 5-year denial.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard of anybody doing that before.
It was just hard because I would not forgive myself. I hated myself for what I did. Okay, this was my best friend's sister's husband that died. Okay, I knew these people. It's not like they were strangers. It's someone I knew. And my actions led to the death of another man. So when she came and she seen me and I told her I can't forgive myself, I kept telling her I can't. It's hard. You know what I mean? And then today, I do forgive myself. And I'm trying to move on. I'm trying to move forward. I'm trying to be a better version of myself. Forgive myself and move on and know about what I did in my past and never, ever become that person again. So that's the hardest part for me today, because it's easy to do wrong, but it's hard to do right. I don't know if you can understand that, but for me, it's easy to go out there and get in trouble.
Melissa's life after his crime was a piece of the puzzle that Matthew could only imagine. Hearing the concrete ways her life changed because of his actions hit him hard. It made him want to share what his experiences in the victim-offender dialogue was like with other men in prison.
People see me today and they're like, Matthew, tell me the story. And I tell them the story and they're like, wow. And we cry. Okay, grown men in prison, we cry. They say it doesn't happen. It happens here all the time. And when I go to my groups, I share my story with Melissa, and we cry. So we are emotional.
Reflecting on the day he met Melissa, Matthew never anticipated forming such a deep emotional bond with her by the time she had to leave.
But then she wanted to hear about my story, how I was brought up. So I shared my whole life with her, how I became who I became, the abuses I suffered as a child. We sat there, we cried together. I had this, I'll tell you something. So when they all left that day, after our 8-hour meeting, she stopped and she looked at everybody and she goes, I feel like we're leaving somebody behind. That's what she told my friend Luke, and he told me, Matthew, that's just amazing that she said that.
Ever since that day in November of 2022, their conversation has become an ongoing dialogue.
I share everything with her. I write her, I keep her updated on all my progress that I make in prison. In 2018, I took a 3-year denial. And she wrote me and she told me, I don't want you taking denials anymore. I want you to go through with your board.
Thanks partly to Melissa, Matthew now understands that he is in control of his life and the person he chooses to be.
And that's all I can do is work on me and change the person I am today from the person I was then. And he's supportive of that. My friends are supportive of that. And Tammy has been my biggest support. She comes to visit me. She goes to see Melissa. She goes to see my brothers. And I don't know when this will all end, but I know when it does, I want to help. I just want to be part of the solution to this problem, help change people's lives. And I believe me and Melissa can do that together. I want us both to tell our stories together. She's been to San Quentin. She's told me about her adventures to San Quentin, how she's talked to men there, and she's a member of the GRIP program that they have there. She helps people today, and she just wants me to hurry up and get out so I can help tell our story, because it's very impactful.
Matthew spends his time helping other incarcerated men review their cases and practice speaking in court.
Common to us, because when we go in front of the board, we do get nervous. And he does the same thing. It's hard for him to articulate. It's hard for me to articulate, because we live this life of violence and we don't speak about stuff. But I told him we have to get comfortable speaking. So we have to go do this. We have to. So me and him are going to apply for the OMCP to become mentors and just start telling our stories and helping inmates in prison. That's the best we can do.
As we did in Melissa's episode, we'll let Matthew share a brief anecdote about the impact his experience with the victim-offender dialogue had on those around him, highlighting how these conversations foster healing and understanding within the community.
I am 52 years old. I've been incarcerated since I was 22 years old. And I just want to leave you with something. So we had it's called Community Day. So all the counselors from all the yards, their free staff, they come onto the yard and they sit with the inmates. So I stood up and I told my story about me and Melissa, and it was very emotional. And one of the counselors, she got up and she left crying. And another counselor left with her to console her, their free staff. So we had another community day, and a lot more counselors came, and they go, Matthew, we want you to tell our story again. I thought, Melissa, so I told my story again. And everybody got emotional, was crying. And after that meeting, the counselor that left the week before, she came up to me and she goes, I just want to let you know that my brother was a victim of gun violence, and your stories move me to want to forgive the person who killed her brother.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing your vulnerability with us. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, our voices can reach far beyond our immediate surroundings, touching lives in ways we may not expect. The stories we hold within us have the power to ignite change, heal wounds, and bring us closer to understanding each other. Next episode, we're joined by Jane, who was the victim of a violent sexual crime in the back of her SUV. If you or someone you know is interested in participating in a victim-offender dialogue, reach out to your local Department of Corrections. If these services are not available to you, consider advocating for them through your local representative. Lastly, if you're enjoying the podcast, rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite listening platform and share with those who might find it meaningful. We'll see you next week. In the meanwhile, be kind to yourself.